The blood dripped from Nora Kane's split lip onto the dusty earth of Redwood Springs, each drop a testament to the small-minded cruelty of a town that had already taken everything from her. The year was 1873, and mercy was as scarce as rain in this unforgiving corner of Arizona territory. Sheriff Dawson brought the whip down again, the crack echoing through the town square as the gathering crowd jeered. Nora refused to cry out, though her knees had long since buckled beneath her. Her calico dress, once a cheerful yellow, was now torn and stained with dirt and blood. "Thieving witch!" Someone called from the crowd. "Husband in the ground not 6 months and already stealing from honest folk," shouted another. Nora's fingers dug into the dirt. She hadn't stolen anything. The bolt of fabric from Peterson's store had been paid for by her late husband before his passing. But Richard Peterson claimed otherwise, and in a town where a widow with no family had no standing, his word was law. "That's enough." A voice cut through the noise, deep and commanding. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Dust swirled around his boots as he stepped forward, spurs jingling with each deliberate stride. His face was shadowed beneath the wide brim of his hat, but there was no mistaking the determination in his stance. Sheriff Dawson's arm paused mid-air, the whip dangling like a venomous snake ready to strike. "This ain't your business, stranger. I'm making it my business." The man stepped between Nora and the sheriff, his back to her as he faced down her tormentor. "No man with an ounce of decency whips a woman in public." "Elijah O'Malley," the stranger said, removing his hat and revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, yet remarkably youthful for a man who carried himself with such authority. He couldn't have been more than 30, with eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea. "I just rode in from Santa Fe. Looks like I arrived just in time." Nora stared up at her defender, vision blurring from pain and exhaustion. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Elijah O'Malley's broad shoulders standing firm between her and the world that wanted her broken. When consciousness returned, Nora found herself on a soft bed, the scent of lavender and clean linen replacing the dust and blood of the town square. She blinked, trying to orient herself in the unfamiliar room. "You're awake," a woman's voice said. "Thank the Lord." A gray-haired woman with kind eyes stood beside the bed, wringing out a cloth in a basin of water. "I'm Martha Quinn, dear. The doctor's been by already. Said you'll be all right with rest." "Where am I?" Nora's voice was barely a whisper. "My boarding house. Mr. O'Malley brought you here after." Martha paused. Well, after he put a stop to that barbaric display. Memories flooded back the whip, the jeering crowd, the stranger standing between her and certain harm. "Mr. O'Malley," she repeated. "The cowboy." Martha nodded. "He paid for your room and the doctor too. Said he couldn't abide seeing a lady mistreated." "I need to thank him." Nora tried to sit up, wincing as pain lanced through her back. "You need to rest," Martha insisted, gently pressing her back against the pillows. "There'll be time for thanking later. Mr. O'Malley has taken a room here as well. Says he's got business in Redwood Springs." Nora wanted to protest, but exhaustion pulled her back into darkness before she could form the words. 3 days passed before Nora was strong enough to leave her room. Each day, Martha brought news that Mr. O'Malley had inquired after her health, along with fresh flowers that now brightened the small room. On the 4th morning, Nora carefully dressed in clothes. Martha had loaned her a simple blue dress that was a touch too large but clean and whole. She pinned her auburn hair into a modest bun and steeled herself to face both her rescuer and whatever remained of her life in Redwood Springs. The boarding house dining room was empty save for one occupant when Nora descended the stairs. Elijah O'Malley sat at the far table, a newspaper spread before him and a cup of coffee cooling at his elbow. He looked up at the sound of her footsteps, immediately rising to his feet. "Mrs. Kane," he said, his voice softer than she remembered from that day in the square. "It's good to see you on your feet." "Mr. O'Malley," Nora acknowledged, her hands fidgeting with her skirt. "I owe you my gratitude and my life." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Would you join me? Martha makes a fine breakfast." Nora hesitated, then nodded, taking the offered seat. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't simply blue, they were a complex mosaic of blue and gray, like the sky before a summer storm. A thin scar traced his jawline, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. "I understand you're new to Redwood Springs," she said after a moment of awkward silence. "Passing through," he replied. "Or I was. Now I find myself curious about a town where men feel justified in beating a woman in broad daylight." Nora's face flushed. "It's not usually. That is, I'm not well regarded here since my husband's passing." "So I gathered." Elijah studied her face. "Would you tell me what happened? Only if you wish to, of course." Something in his steady gaze made Nora want to trust him. Perhaps it was the way he had stood against the sheriff without hesitation, or perhaps it was simply that he was the first person in months to look at her with something other than suspicion or pity. "My husband, Thomas, died of fever last winter," she began. "We hadn't been in Redwood Springs long less than a year. He was a bookkeeper for the mining company." She paused as Martha appeared with coffee and plates of eggs and bacon. The older woman gave Nora's shoulder a gentle squeeze before retreating to the kitchen. "After Thomas died, I tried to keep our house by taking in sewing, but it wasn't enough. The mining company claimed Thomas had made errors in their books, though he was meticulous in his work. They withheld his final wages, which left me with nothing." Elijah listened intently, his food untouched. "Last week, I went to Peterson's store to collect a bolt of fabric Thomas had paid for before his death. Mr. Peterson claimed there was no record of the payment and accused me of trying to steal it." Her voice grew bitter. "In Redwood Springs, a widow's word means nothing against a businessman's." "And that led to the public punishment," Elijah concluded, his jaw tightening. Nora nodded, dropping her gaze to her plate. "I have no family here, no one to speak for me. Sheriff Dawson is Peterson's brother-in-law." "What will you do now?" Elijah asked. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Nora had asked herself the same thing countless times over the sleepless nights in the boarding house. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no money, no home. The house belonged to the mining company." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But I'm alive, thanks to you, that's something." Elijah leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Mrs. Kane, I'm planning to stay in Redwood Springs for a while. I might be able to help you find a position." Or perhaps he was interrupted by the boarding house door swinging open with such force that it banged against the wall. Sheriff Dawson stood in the doorway, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered gun. "O'Malley," he growled. "You're wanted at the jail. Peterson's pressing charges for interference with justice." Elijah rose slowly, his posture relaxed despite the tension radiating through the room. "Is that so? Well, I suppose I should come explain myself." He turned to Nora. "Please excuse me, Mrs. Kane. We'll continue our conversation later." "Mr. O'Malley," Nora began, alarmed, but he shook his head slightly. "Don't worry," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "This isn't my first encounter with small-town justice." Nora watched helplessly as Elijah followed the sheriff out, his back straight and head high. For the second time in less than a week, someone was in trouble because of her. Martha emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "That man," she muttered, glaring at the door the sheriff had just exited. "Acting like he owns this town." "Will Mr. O'Malley be all right?" Nora asked, unable to hide the tremor in her voice. Martha's expression softened. "That one can take care of himself, I'd wager. He's been asking questions around town since he arrived about the mining company, about Peterson's store. Something tells me Mr. O'Malley didn't just happen upon Redwood Springs by accident." Nora frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean men like him don't typically intervene in a public whipping unless they have a reason to be interested. He knew your name before anyone told him." This revelation sent Nora's thoughts spinning. Why would a stranger know her name? What possible interest could he have in her or Redwood Springs? Hours passed with no word of Elijah. Nora tried to make herself useful around the boarding house, but her mind kept returning to the cowboy who had stepped between her and the whip. By evening, she had worked herself into such a state of worry that Martha finally handed her a shawl. "Go to the jail if you must," the older woman said, "just to ease your mind, but be careful." The walk to the jailhouse took Nora past Peterson's store. The shopkeeper stood outside, sweeping his porch though it was nearly dark. He looked up as she passed, his face twisting with contempt. "Still here, are you?" he called. "Thought you'd have slunk away by now." Nora kept walking, her head high despite the fear curling in her stomach. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. The jailhouse was lit by a single lamp, the yellow glow spilling out onto the boardwalk. Nora hesitated at the door, suddenly uncertain. What if her presence only made things worse for Elijah? Before she could decide, the door opened and Elijah himself stepped out, adjusting his hat. He stopped short at the sight of her. "Mrs. Kane," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "I was worried," she admitted, "when you didn't return to the boarding house." A smile touched his lips, transforming his weathered face. "You were concerned for me. That's kind, considering I'm the reason you were in that situation to begin with." Nora frowned. "What do you mean?" Elijah glanced over his shoulder at the jailhouse door, then gently took her elbow. "Let's walk a bit. I have something to tell you, and I'd rather not do it where the sheriff might overhear." They walked in silence until they reached a small park at the edge of town. The evening was mild, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. Elijah guided her to a bench beneath an old oak tree, far enough from the path to ensure privacy. "Mrs. Kane, Nora, if I may," he began, removing his hat and holding it in his hands. "I came to Redwood Springs looking for you." Nora stiffened. "For me? Why?" "I work for Pinkerton Detective Agency," he explained. "Your husband hired us before his death to investigate irregularities he discovered in the mining company's books." The world seemed to tilt beneath Nora's feet. "Thomas hired detectives. He never said anything." "He was concerned for your safety," Elijah continued. "He believed the mining company was embezzling funds and feared they might silence him if they discovered he knew. But the fever may have been natural or may not. We're still investigating." Elijah's expression was grave. "Your husband sent documents to our office in Denver. Those documents implicate not only the mining company but also several prominent citizens of Redwood Springs, including Richard Peterson." Nora's mind raced, pieces falling into place. "That's why Peterson accused me of stealing." "He thinks I have Thomas's proof." Elijah nodded. "When I arrived and found you being publicly punished, I knew I couldn't maintain my cover as a drifting cowboy. I had to intervene." "What happened at the jail today?" Nora asked. "Peterson withdrew his complaint when I suggested I might have information about certain financial improprieties that the territorial governor would find interesting." A satisfied smile crossed Elijah's face. "Sheriff Dawson was quick to release me after that." Nora sat in stunned silence, absorbing the implications. Her husband had been investigating corruption. He had died, possibly been murdered because of what he knew. And now this man, this detective disguised as a cowboy, had put himself at risk to protect her. "Why tell me this now?" she finally asked. "Because you deserve to know the truth," Elijah said simply, "and because I need your help to finish what your husband started." "My help? What could I possibly do?" Thomas must have kept copies of his evidence somewhere. "If we can find those documents, we can bring down the people responsible for his death and clear your name in this town." Nora thought of the small lockbox Thomas had always kept in his desk, the one that had disappeared after his death when the mining company reclaimed their house. She had assumed it contained only business papers of no value to her. "There was a box," she said slowly. "Thomas never showed me what was inside, but he was protective of it." Hope flared in Elijah's eyes. "Do you know where it might be now? The mining company took everything from our house." "If it still exists, it would be in the company office." Elijah nodded thoughtfully. "Then that's where we'll look. But not tonight. Tonight you should rest. Tomorrow we'll begin planning." As they walked back toward the boarding house, Nora found herself studying Elijah from the corner of her eye. He was nothing like Thomas, who had been slight and scholarly. Elijah moved with the confident ease of a man accustomed to dangerous situations, yet there was a gentleness in how he'd spoken to her, a respect that had been absent in her interactions with the townspeople since Thomas's death. At the boarding house steps, Elijah paused. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth from the beginning." "You saved me," Nora replied. "That's truth enough for now." For the first time in months, Nora slept without nightmares, her dreams instead filled with the image of a tall cowboy standing between her and harm. The next morning brought a plan. Elijah had discovered that the mining company's office would be empty that evening due to a company dinner at the hotel. They would use that opportunity to search for Thomas's lockbox. "It's dangerous," Elijah warned as they sat in the boarding house garden speaking in low voices. "If we're caught, it would be more than a whipping this time." "I don't care," Nora said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "Thomas died for this. I owe it to him to finish what he started." Elijah studied her face, his expression unreadable. "You're a remarkable woman, Nora Kane." The compliment warmed her more than it should have, sending a flush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. As dusk fell, they made their way to the mining company office on the edge of town. The windows were dark, the building silent. Elijah produced a set of small tools from his pocket and made quick work of the lock on the back door. "Stay close," he whispered as they slipped inside. The office was larger than Nora had expected, with several desks and filing cabinets. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. "Where would they keep confiscated items?" Elijah asked. Nora thought of Thomas's descriptions of the office layout. "There's a storeroom in the back." Thomas mentioned it once. They found the room easily enough, a small chamber filled with shelves of equipment and boxes. Elijah lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low to avoid detection from outside. "Look for anything that might have belonged to your husband," he instructed. They searched methodically, careful to leave everything as they found it. After nearly an hour, Nora was beginning to lose hope when Elijah made a soft sound of triumph. "Is this it?" he asked, holding up a small metal box with the initials TK scratched into the lid. Nora's heart leaped. "Yes, that's Thomas's handwriting." Elijah tucked the box under his arm. "Let's go before our luck runs out." They had just reached the main office when the front door rattled. Elijah extinguished the lantern and pulled Nora behind a large desk, his body shielding hers as the door swung open. Two men entered, their voices carrying in the quiet room. "Peterson's getting nervous," one said. "Says that Pinkerton man is asking too many questions." "Peterson's always nervous," the second man replied. "But he's right about one thing: we need to deal with the Kane woman. If she finds those papers her husband hid, already taken care of, I've got men watching the boarding house. When she returns, they'll make sure she has an unfortunate accident. No one will question another tragedy befalling the unlucky widow." Nora felt Elijah tense beside her, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. She placed her hand over his, shaking her head slightly. They were outnumbered, and revealing themselves now would only get them killed. The men moved toward the back room, giving Elijah and Nora the chance to slip out the front door and into the shadows of the street. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Elijah said once they were a safe distance from the office. "They're planning to kill you tonight." "The documents," Nora insisted. "We need to see what Thomas found." Elijah hesitated, then nodded. "Not at the boarding house. They're watching it. Follow me." He led her to the livery stable where his horse was kept. The stableman was asleep in the corner, snoring loudly. Elijah quickly saddled his horse, a powerful chestnut gelding. "We'll ride out of town," he whispered. "I know a place we can examine the documents safely." Nora had never ridden astride before, but there was no time for propriety. Elijah helped her onto the horse, then mounted behind her, his arms encircling her as he took the reins. The closeness made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with their danger. They rode hard for an hour, following a trail that wound into the foothills outside town. Eventually, they reached a small cabin nestled among pine trees. "A line shack for one of the ranches," Elijah explained as he helped her down. "Abandoned now, but it will serve our purpose." Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. Elijah lit a lamp and placed the lockbox on the table. "Can you open it?" Nora asked. Elijah produced his tools again, working the lock with practiced precision. When the lid finally popped open, they both leaned forward eagerly. Inside were several folded documents and a letter addressed to Nora in Thomas's neat handwriting. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "My dearest Nora," she read aloud, her voice catching. "If you are reading this, then my fears have been realized and I am no longer with you. I have discovered a conspiracy that reaches to the highest levels of the Redwood Mining Company." The letter detailed how Thomas had uncovered evidence that the company was not only embezzling funds, but also falsifying safety reports, resulting in numerous preventable mining accidents. Peterson, as the company's banker, had been helping to launder the stolen money, while Sheriff Dawson ensured that any complaints were silenced. "The documents enclosed provide proof of their crimes," the letter concluded. "I have sent copies to the Pinkerton agency, but keep these safe. They are your protection. All my love always, Thomas." Nora lowered the letter, tears streaming down her face. "He knew they might kill him. He was trying to protect me, and I never even knew he was in danger." Elijah placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He was a brave man. And now we can finish what he started." They spent hours examining the documents, which included ledgers, correspondence, and even a list of miners who had died in accidents that could have been prevented. By dawn, they had organized the evidence and formulated a plan. "We need to get these to the territorial governor," Elijah said. "He's the only one with enough authority to take on the mining company." "The governor is in Phoenix," Nora pointed out. "That's a 3-day journey at least. Then we'd better get started." Elijah began gathering the documents. "They'll realize you're missing by now. They'll be searching for us." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses broke the morning stillness. Elijah moved to the window, his expression hardening. "Peterson, Dawson, and 4 others," he reported. "Someone must have seen us leave town." Nora's heart pounded. "What do we do?" Elijah checked his gun, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a smaller pistol which he handed to Nora. "Can you shoot?" "Thomas taught me for protection when we first moved west," she replied, taking the weapon with steady hands. "Good. If anything happens to me, take my horse and ride south. There's a Pinkerton office in Tucson." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Nora said firmly. "We're getting out of this together." Something flickered in Elijah's eyes, surprise, followed by a warmth that made Nora's breath catch. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to touch her cheek. "Nora Kane," he said softly, "when this is over." The cabin door splintered inward before he could finish, Sheriff Dawson's bulky frame filling the doorway, gun drawn. "Well, well," he drawled. "The widow and her pet detective thought you could steal company property and get away with it." "The only thieves here are you and your friends," Elijah replied, positioning himself between Nora and the sheriff. "We have proof of your crimes, Dawson, enough to send you to prison for the rest of your life." Peterson appeared behind the sheriff, his face mottled with rage. "Give us the documents and perhaps we'll be merciful." "Like you were merciful to my husband." Nora stepped forward, her gun aimed steadily at Peterson's chest. "Or to me in the town square." Uncertainty flickered across the sheriff's face. "Now, Mrs. Kane, let's not be hasty." "We're leaving," Elijah stated, gathering the documents into a satchel. "You can step aside or you can try to stop us, but I should warn you I'm not just a detective. I was a sharpshooter in the war." The standoff lasted only seconds, though to Nora it felt like hours. Then, unexpectedly, one of the men behind Peterson stepped forward. "I've heard enough," he said. His badge identified him as a deputy, though Nora had never seen him before. "Sheriff Dawson, Richard Peterson, you're both under arrest." Confusion swept through the cabin. Dawson turned, his gun wavering. "What the hell are you talking about, Jenkins?" The deputy Jenkins held up a letter. "Federal marshal, actually. Been investigating the mining company for months. Just needed the final evidence." He nodded toward the satchel in Elijah's hands. "Which it seems you've kindly provided." What followed was a blur of activity. The men Jenkins had brought with him weren't Peterson's allies but federal agents posing as miners. They quickly disarmed Dawson and Peterson, binding their hands as Jenkins explained that he'd been working with the Pinkerton agency all along. "O'Malley was our inside man," Jenkins said, "though I didn't expect him to be quite so dramatic about it. Standing between a whip and a woman makes for quite a reputation." Elijah had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I couldn't just watch," he said, his eyes finding Nora's. "Some things a man can't abide." As the prisoners were led away, Nora and Elijah found themselves alone in the cabin doorway, the morning sun painting the landscape gold. "You knew the marshal was here all along?" Nora asked. Elijah nodded. "We've been building this case for months." "Your husband's evidence was the final piece we needed." His expression softened. "I'm sorry for not telling you everything." "You saved my life," Nora replied. "Twice now. I think that earns you some leeway with the truth." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Before we were interrupted, I was going to say something." "Were you?" Nora felt a blush warming her cheeks. "When this is over," Elijah continued, taking her hand in his, "I'd like to court you properly, Nora Kane, if you'd allow it." The request was so formal, so earnest that Nora couldn't help but laugh, a genuine laugh, the first since Thomas's death. "Court me. Mr. O'Malley, you've already seen me at my worst, defended my honor and saved my life. I'd say we're well past the courtship stage." Elijah's eyebrows rose, but his eyes crinkled with humor. "Is that so? And what stage would you say we're at, Mrs. Kane?" In answer, Nora stepped forward and pressed her lips to his, a bold move that surprised them both. When she pulled back, Elijah's expression was one of wonder. I'd say, she whispered, we're at the beginning of something unexpected. Elijah's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. I can work with beginnings, he murmured before kissing her again, more thoroughly this time. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Nora Kane became Nora O'Malley in a small ceremony in Denver. The mining company executives had been convicted, their assets seized and distributed to the families of miners who had died in their negligence. Redwood Springs was under new management, though Nora and Elijah had decided to make their home in Denver, where Elijah continued his work with the Pinkerton agency. On their wedding night, as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room overlooking the city, Elijah wrapped his arms around his bride from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Nora turned in his embrace, studying the face that had become more dear to her than she could have imagined that day in the town square. Only that Thomas never saw justice served. He did, Elijah assured her, through you. Your courage made it possible. Our courage, she corrected, placing her hand against his cheek. The cowboy who stood between me and the whip. Elijah smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. Best decision I ever made. As he lowered his mouth to hers, Nora Kane O'Malley knew that from the ashes of tragedy, something beautiful had grown, a love forged in adversity and strengthened by shared purpose. In the wild expanses of the West, she had found not just justice but a second chance at happiness, with a man who had proved his worth not with words but with actions, standing firm when others would have turned away. And that, she thought as she surrendered to his kiss, was worth everything they had endured to reach this moment.